So the Croydon Council is effectively bankrupt now. And the Southwest Londoner inside Croydon and others like that are reporting this. And inside Croydon is one of the supporters of the corrupt mayor system. So they want Croydon to become even more corrupt than it already is. And they're saying exclusive on yesterday. Devastating blow for the borough as it has issued a Section 114 notice, making it the first local authority in London for 2 decades to admit it has gone bust. It's written by somebody called Stephen Downs. The move will see day-to-day control of the council handed over to government-appointed commissioners. Croydon will become only the second council in England in 20 years to issue a Section 114 notice, and the first in London since Hackney in 2000. And they're saying that the Section 114 notice bans all new expenditure at the council, with the exception of statutory services for protecting vulnerable people. Now that kind of phrase, protecting vulnerable people, is one of the biggest cons and lies perpetrated by local councils in England. They don't give a ... about vulnerable people. In fact, they don't care if they make perfectly fit and able persons vulnerable. And on this concept, we shall be talking more about Tower Hamlets, John Biggs and Newham Council and their corruption and lies and lying. Now, the piece about this bankruptcy, Section 114 notice, being carried by inside Croydon is suspicious because inside Croydon has been one of the corrupt outfits that has been campaigning to make Croydon more corrupt and more unstable and more kind of bankrupt by supporting the so-called campaign to turn Croydon a directly elected mayor lumbered corrupt clique. And inside Croydon hasn't actually reported seriously, rigorously, as to the chapter and verse of why Negrini, the chief executive, was allowed the kind of freedom to sink the council into deeper debt, which is now more than £1 billion. And neither the so-called petitioners or petition collectors or organizers, nor inside Croydon, nor indeed privatize Rotten Boroughs page, which has published a number of items about Croydon and its de facto bankrupt situation and corruption. None of these organs, none of these outlets has said how things will get better if Croydon became a borough with an elected mayor. Evidence from Newham, evidence from Tower Hamlets, evidence from Lewisham, all the mayor-lumbered boroughs have suffered loss of services, loss of amenities, and most certainly loss of accountability and democracy as a direct result of the directly elected mayor regimes being foisted on them. So how are these people supposedly reporting rigorously when they're supporting further corrupting the council? And we shall come to a similar kind of idiocy being paraded by most of the right-wing papers. Well, as we have said earlier in the last edition, or last part, that Andrew Pierce was running the exclusive, so-called, about Boris Johnson's girlfriend or fiancée kind of having been responsible for the resignation of Kane, the propaganda chief at number 10 Downing Street. Now that's a lie. It's not an exclusive. It is the main line being paraded. Well, the departure of Kane, that is, paraded on the front page of the Daily Telegraph, Daily Boris Graph. And let's see what this scum is saying. So they're not and they're doing this on page 2 of the Sun. They're saying that Kane, the headline is number 10, War sees spin doctor quit. And essentially the Boris Graph is the one that has got the entire front page devoted to this Kane drama. And the various things they are saying there include the claim that there is a feminist kind of element at work, that Kerry Simmons and Allegra Stratton want an end to the all-male kind of team and the crew. Well, that may be the fantasy, but that is not what the main contents of the kind of explanation of the spin is saying. The spin is spin, kind of saying who is going and who is staying and who is for Brexit and who is not for Brexit and who is linked with who, not the gender and not feminism, not women's rights at all. And there is a Matt cartoon which is typical. It's a take on the Daily Mail serial kind of reporting on the forgery of bank statements by Martin Bashir, who gave the forged documents to Diana's brother, younger brother, Charles Spencer. And Charles Spencer, in turn, used that as evidence, and he played his part as Bashir wanted him to play the part, to convince Diana to trust Bashir, so that Bashir would have the interview with her, which he did, and aired as Panorama in 1995. So this Matt cartoon is referring to all of that. And it's a quotation mark. It's like a kind of phone call from somebody reading the newspaper headed by Diana. And it says, the phone caller is saying, is that Panorama, that is the BBC Panorama program which had the Bashir interview with Diana in 1995. Is that Panorama? Question mark. Could you forge some bank statements to make it look like I have paid my television license? Now that's very good. Because television license is one of the biggest aches and biggest kinds of concern for most people who are irritated by the television license and the collection and the nuisance that they cause in kind of collecting the kind of license. So that's the one that is there. But essentially, the entire Boris graph is given to Boris Johnson. His picture in the center and his fiancée, girlfriend, Kerry Simmons on the right, and the person shown on the left is the one that is going, Lee Kane. And the Lee Kane is apparently, according to this copy here, the copy on this side of the article, saying that Kerry Simmons and Allegra Stratton played the key part in pushing him out. Apparently, Boris Johnson was what is the word? Overridden. Yes, overridden by Kerry Simmons on this one, according to this kind of spin on the Boris graph. Apparently, Boris Johnson organized a meeting with Lee Kane to discuss his kind of whatever, future or his past. And, it was like he was getting promoted to a post. And the next sentence is that Kerry Simmons objected to that. Now, this is a constitutionally unacceptable position. Kerry Simmons is not a member of parliament, and she has not anything to do with the government. So what is the point of even referring to her as having any kind of say on who gets appointed and who gets ousted? That's the thing. That is the thing that even Tony Blair's wife, Cherie Blair or Cherie Booth, didn't do. Not as far as the reports are concerned. So how far things have gotten worse? It's like the nearest example, the nearest parallel, the comparison is with the Donald Trump kind of regime, where his entire family is in some way or other members of the cabinet or the member of the government or the member of the regime. Boris Johnson hasn't appointed his father or his sister, Rachel, to any post that is known, but they have been kind of serving as his propagandists. And that is completely unheard of, unthinkable and unacceptable. And if any of the Labour Party's kind of counterparts in the leadership position had a relation or member of the family even make a comment, mild comment about what was going on in terms of the policy of the leader, then the entire right-wing, racist and kind of anti-social Fleet Street would go to war against that. Instead, they're celebrating Boris Johnson's regime there. And the piece in the Times, the piece by Matthew Paris in the Times is saying that what is Matthew Paris saying about the Boris Johnson? Let's see. So remember, this is the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. It's not rereading or reinterpreting the contents. It is completely diagnosing the corrupt contents and the false contents and exposing, as far as is possible based on the evidence of the contents, the corruption. Okay, so this is the piece that Matthew Paris has written, or the Matthew Paris wrote it yesterday, that Boris Johnson actually was getting away. That was yesterday's column, I'm remembering. And they've got on the Times a piece about Croydon. They said Croydon is gone bust now, and it's there. It's the fact that Croydon has gone bust should be kind of examined by these people, but they're not examining at all. It's like what is happening with the busting. Section 114 notice is that the community secretary, one Robert Jenrick, has sent or will send commissioners, just like Pickles sent commissioners to Tower Hamlets, but the circumstances are constitutionally different. The London Borough of Croydon has in effect declared itself bankrupt after running up 1.5 billion in debt. The local authority issued a Section 114 notice banning further spending and admitting that it cannot balance the books. It is the third council to do so in the past 20 years. So it's saying third council. Is the inside Croydon saying the same, or is it giving a different number? Section 114 notices warned the government that a council cannot balance its books. They were introduced in the 1980s to try to prevent councils going into financial collapse and prevent any further spending. Chris Philp, the Conservative MP for Croydon South, tweeted that Labour had bankrupted the borough through poor financial control. A spokesman for the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government said it was beginning an urgent review into the council. He said, "We are aware of serious concerns around the council's governance and risk management, and the recent public interest report was damning about the governance within Croydon Council, which have been entirely irresponsible with their spending and investments." Now this is rich coming from the Times and the Tories. Because the Times itself has got a table about the money, this is only 1 billion plus. But the Times is running the table about the money that is going to whoever is going, and let's see the table if we can find the table on this one. And there are some funny articles. And the Times says, yes, this is the one on the page 15 of the Times, and it is saying spin doctors, that is propagandists, raking in, that is pocketing 130 million during the pandemic. So these are publicly paid liars. And it has got a list of the topics on which the money is going, and it says where cash is going. 12 billion pounds NHS test and trace scheme. PPE for healthcare workers, that is 15 billion pounds. The next is 50 billion pounds for initial Farla scheme. That is Farla scheme meaning kind of subsidizing businesses that are going under or going on lockdown. And 30 billion Farla extension until the end of March 2020. And 7.3 billion grants for self-employed workers from November to January 2020. 40 billion, that is 40 billion pounds, bounced back loans, of which up to 26 billion could never be repaid because of fraud or loan defaults. 26 billion lost to fraud. Think about that. 12.7 billion to support to devolved administrations in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland as of August. Now, this is the 26 billion that is going to be lost to fraud. What does it show? It shows a total dysfunction in the supposed system for recovery. If 26 billion is going to be lost, and that is only a very generous estimate, kind of generous in the sense of underestimating the amount to be lost to fraud, then the numbers of people that have been murdered, mass murdered by the Department for 110 Poverty Creation, DWP, using the pretext of sanctions and depriving them of the basic benefit of 70 or 80 pounds or whatever a week. How does that compare with the guaranteed assured loss of 26 billion to fraud? None of the fraudsters, none of the people who will be defaulting and not repaying the money will be even sanctioned, let alone kind of deprived of literally their lives. Because the people who have committed suicide under the Tories regime at the DWP, Department for Deprivation, Want and Poverty Creation, fronted by Dracula Duncan Smith, those people didn't commit any crime. They didn't rob or loot or deny the public of anything. They were desperately ill, unwell, vulnerable people, desperately needed, and the basic, they needed to be alive. That is the amount of money they needed, few £100 a month. And they were denied that. And that denial was part of the planned strategy, the agenda to push them over and push them to commit suicide. That is what happened under Ian Dirty Duncan Smith at the DWP. And the Labour Party in opposition did not say a thing, really, except plastic platitudes presented as part of the Commons proceedings or questioning of the department, which didn't really even register as being expressed by the opposition while these people are being mass murdered and massacred by a suicide imposed on them by the sanction operated by the DWP, Department for Deprivation, Want and Poverty Creation. DWP, UK DWP. And here is every day the Fleet Street papers are running one sort or another account. It is spun account, but it's an account about the waste of hundreds of millions of pounds by criminals in posts. Criminals like the cons that have been given jobs under the pretext of dealing with COVID-19. And there is no parallel, there is no kind of corresponding comment by the Fleet Street papers as to how this is going on. This is a crime. Basic definition of crime and theft. Say, for example, the definition of theft as contained in the Theft Acts, the two main statutes, the legislation, the Theft Acts of 1968 and 1978. They have been kind of subsequently amended, modified, but the substantial body of the Theft Act is contained in these two parts, 1968 and 1978. And those acts actually cover fraud and deception and all the other things. And by most of the definition of theft, these criminals are committing theft and robbery, and nobody is being prosecuted. Think about that. There is written law defining these crimes as crimes, and the criminals are not being treated as criminals, they're not being prosecuted. Whereas poor people, poor in poor health and in poor kind of income range, desperate for 80 pound, 90 pound, or whatever amount they needed from the DWP every week to just buy the bare essentials, were denied that money and they were forced to commit suicide, literally. That is crime against humanity. By definition of the crime against humanity, that is crime against humanity. And the UK papers are not treating these as crimes against humanity, knowing full well that they are crimes against humanity. And Fleet Street is not bothered about raising the question as to why these crimes have been committed and the criminals not being prosecuted under the human rights legislation and human rights kind of framework of the Constitution and the obligations that the UK is under as a signatory to these treaties, protocols, and conventions and agreements and charters and declarations that are all in place, intended to deter and discourage and to penalize the perpetrators of violations and crimes against humanity. So again, look at the kind of dysfunction of the state under Boris Johnson, fronted by Boris Johnson. The House of Commons inquiries section has told our campaign that it doesn't have information about the UK's kind of status as a signatory to all these international treaties, charters, conventions, and all the rest of it, because the inquiry section says that they are only in place as a source for information about the work of the House of Commons and what happens in the House of Commons. That may be the case. But essentially, the House of Commons is part of the UK state. And as such, the House of Commons Inquiry Service or Inquiry Office should be able to provide information as to which of the international instruments, that is what is called in law, the treaties, the conventions, etc., the instruments that the UK has been signed up to and has been a member as an active signatory. I mean, that is nothing to do with the EU membership side. These are charters, conventions that are outside of the EU. And so as the House of Commons Inquiry Service says that they are not about the government and whatever, they therefore don't know and have shown no interest in offering information as to the impact this has on society, because the reason why the United Kingdom or any other member signed or is signatory or signed up to these charters, declarations, conventions, agreements, and so on, is to raise the standard of service, the standard of rights of the people inside the signatory state. So there is a big emptiness and the vacuum between the people who are on the paper in terms of the contents of the signature or signed up books, signature carrying books of these international treaties and organizations. The British people, or the people in Britain, are deemed, that is assumed, that is supposed to be enjoying the benefits of these enhanced kind of legal rights. And yet, the place of lawmaking, that is the House of Commons, doesn't have a clue. Is that an exception? No. As we have been saying, the similar inquiries we have made of the UK Supreme Court and the High Court, and similar blankness has come our way in reply, which is not a reply at all. See the gravity of the emptiness and dysfunction in Britain. And then you've got the local councils looting the people, like the chief executive getting paid £222,000 a year, plus parks of another 100,000 pounds a year. And now she is obviously must have pocketed £500,000 or £1 million as she left. I mean, what is that? Millions of pounds being given to spin doctors, like £130,000, and yet there is no money for the school meals for the poor children, and there is no money for most of the people in low income. And Starmer is silent about all of that. So where is accountability and democracy and human rights going to come from? So we shall be looking further and in more detail at these issues in the next part. This has been a short part, but this is because of the complexity of the issues we are discussing. It is advisedly kept shorter than would be the case